Hey, welcome everyone to the spoiler-free review of Infamous First Light. Now, if you're looking for the written version of this review, you can find a link to my website in the video description. The game was originally released in 2014 for PS4 and PS4 Pro, but is also available for backwards compatibility on PS5. This game is a prequel for one of the side characters from Infamous Second Son. Second Son being the third game in the Infamous series, but it's also a soft reboot, so you don't need to play the first two games. First Light was large enough to be considered a standalone game to purchase separately and run independently from Infamous Second Son. A link to the review of Infamous Second Son can be found in the video description. Now, switching over to the plot, the game starts with an intro into events and takes place 7 years after the events of Infamous 2, in a different setting and with completely different characters. Following the events of Infamous 2, the government fears more people emerging with powers, and these people are basically referred to as conduits, would cause mass destruction and cause chaos, so the government created a new military division called the Department of Unified Protection, DUP for short. The DUP's main responsibility is to capture conduits since they're branded as bioterrorists, even if the conduit hasn't done anything wrong. First Light focuses on Abigail Walker, aka Fetch. She's caught by the DUP and interrogated on how she first got her powers and how much of her powers she can control. She explains that after her parents discovered she had powers, they called the DUP to have her locked up. Her brother Brent took her and ran away with her to prevent her from being locked up. They both ended up with drug addictions until Brent kicked the bad habit and helped Fetch with her addiction. He also had Fetch not rely on her powers as it could draw attention from the DUP. Their plan was to save enough money by doing jobs for gangs and flee the country so the DUP couldn't chase after them. The game switches between Fetch being locked up by the DUP in the present time and then flashbacks of her and Brent on the run and being homeless. Eventually, she reveals to the DUP how their last job was supposed to have a major payout, but things fell apart. Fetch was forced to use her powers to allow her and her brother to escape the police. This drew the attention of the DUP. To make things worse, the final job was botched by a Russian gang and Brent was kidnapped while Fetch was working the job. It's a simple story, but helps to show Fetch's struggle of running from the DUP, trying to save her brother, finding a way for both of them to flee the country, and fighting her interpersonal demons. The characters are written quite well. Fetch is far more interesting than the main character of Second Son, that character being Delsin. Throughout First Light, it's shown how Fetch struggles with her drug addiction and her inability to keep her powers in check. Brent is her anchor and keeps her stable, but without him, she allows her emotions loose, which can trigger unstable, deadly use of her powers. There's a deep history to Fetch, as she escapes her traumatic past and her parents' betrayal, ending up on the run with everything getting ruined and eventually somehow getting caught by the DUP. There's a sympathetic feeling for her. As a gamer, you're shown her physical and emotional struggles. She's a really well-written character. Brent is also a decent side character. It's nice to see him being level-headed and keeping Fetch grounded. He's a guy who puts up with any life struggles that comes his and Fetch's way, but always looks for the positive outcome. Without revealing too much, the villains have mediocre characters. The villain from Fetch's flashbacks has great lines and voice acting, but is rather cliche. The villain from the present-time DUP prison is also mediocre. Just like other Infamous games, there's a power upgrade tree. You can earn upgrade points throughout the game and upgrade almost any of Fetch's powers. The one thing that's different from other Infamous games is the lack of a karma system. In the other Infamous games, if you do good deeds, then you can spend points on more passive abilities. Do bad deeds and you unlock more destructive powers. It's not a big deal that the karma system is missing from First Light, but something worth pointing out, especially to Infamous fans. One of the great things about Fetch is how fast she is. You can beat this entire game without having to unlock much of her powers. It's great because you feel powerful, but it also makes some parts of the game a little too easy. As mentioned earlier, this is a standalone game and it can be completed in about 3 hours. Even here in 2022, it's still $20 Canadian, which is rather pricey. The game should have been priced at $15 at release and $10 today. I'm not saying it's a bad game you shouldn't pay for, it's just that its length doesn't justify the cost. While some AAA titles can last only 12 hours, the problem with this game is that by the time things really pick up and you get really into it, the game ends. The controller settings and combat mechanics are top-notch and smooth, just like other Infamous games. In fact, thanks to Fetch being a fast-moving character, combat feels quite fluid. The prison environment is basic and there isn't much to see. The main chunk of the game takes place in Seattle flashbacks and looks great. There's plenty of areas to go around, and even with Fetch's speed powers, it takes time to get around the map. The graphics are just as stunning as Infamous Second Son. It's surprising how good this game looks on PS4 or PS5. A word of caution though, on certain HDR supported TVs like my LG OLED, the game will be too dark to play. I spent a couple of hours researching a fix while playing Infamous Second Son, as that game suffers from the exact same issues as First Light. It turns out you need to change the brightness and contrast in the game settings menu to make it playable. You don't really have to adjust anything on your PS4, PS4 Pro, or PS5 console. Character animation is quite detailed, even on certain close-ups. Just like other Infamous games, cutscenes take place while using in-game graphics or like a graphic novel. One thing to point out is that side quests are a little boring. They mainly consist of Fetch doing a laser graffiti of some kind or timed obstacle courses for the most part. This isn't a huge deal as the game is rather short, but a little variety would have been nice. Enemies are rather varied. In the present prison scenes, you'll face off enemies in training simulations, and in the flashbacks you'll face enemies with guns and some with powers, so there's a bit of variety there. When it comes to sound, like previous Infamous games, the soundtrack is spot on. While the soundtrack seems a bit toned down compared to other Infamous games, probably due to First Light being shorter in length, it works well. The voice acting is spot on, from Fetch's character being sarcastic and sometimes fearful during certain events.
I'd wake up with new powers. It was like my body decided to fight, but my mind just gave up.
Her brother sounding like her calming anchor, and even to the villains' voices. Sound effects work well to the situation that Fetch is in. Fetch's powers don't sound as powerful as previous Infamous protagonists, but that's okay because her powers aren't focused on burst strength, but instead on rapid speed. It's common in the game industry when someone sees a 6 or 7 or 7.5 out of 10, they automatically think the game is bad and not worth their time. I would actually argue against that, especially for fans of the Infamous series. In my opinion, Fetch is one of the most interesting characters out of the entire Infamous series, so it's interesting to see a bit more of her background story. It's just that because this game has been out for so many years now, it should have been reduced further in pricing. And like I said, by the time you really pick up into the game 3 hours in, it ends, and that's pretty much it. So it's still worth checking out if you have some extra cash laying around. That's pretty much it for me. So if you found this video useful, be sure to check out my social links in the video description. Hit the like button, it does help, subscribe, and thanks for watching.